Hi, it's a privilege to spend some time with you today and talk about a very important part of the leadership journey, and that is leading self. Really grateful that Chuck and the team gave me a chance to address you as local leaders in this particular area. I've got some mileage in this particular area and some understanding of my own self. I want to assure you I've got lots of losses and a few wins. So I'm speaking to you as a fellow sojourner in this walk of getting to know God better, getting to know myself better, and leading out of a character base. So the goal here is to spend about 15 minutes with you talking about what does it really mean to lead self. I'll open up my own life a little bit, share some personal illustrations, give you some word pictures to think about, and at the end, give you a few challenges to think about. I want you to think about leadership at a macro level for a moment. Anytime you're asked to lead something, you obviously have to think about direction, the North Star of the mission, but you also have to think about that in the context of what your starting point is. What resources do you have? What assets do you have? What liabilities do you have? And that's really the basis of self-leadership, understanding who I am and what my strengths are, what my abilities are, what my opportunities are inside of myself. Think about this as a coach or an athletic director who's coming in, taking over a new team or an athletic department. They are asking themselves the question, do I have the right talent? Do I have the resources and the commitment to really compete? And so they're doing their own situational analysis, assessment of what they have in order to move forward and lead out of that. So let me bring this down to a personal level. You really have to conduct a situational analysis. And so you're asking yourselves the questions, what assets do I have personally? Liabilities? What strengths do I have? What soft spots do I have in my character? Are there patterns of sin in my life that continue to trip me up in my leadership journey? Is there unresolved hurt and pain that make it difficult for me to lead when it's really tough and people need me to really show up and be present and for them? I heard this week a great illustration from a marriage counseling setting, and it really applies to me specifically 6 years ago when I was invited to come into the current role that I'm in. The illustration goes like this. A couple who's really stuck in their marriage, they're blaming, they're not communicating really well, goes to a marriage counselor. And the marriage counselor asks both of them, how would you want to grade your marriage? What's your dream? What's your goal? And obviously both of them say, well, we want an A marriage. And the counselor responds back to them, that's impossible because you're both C people. C people can't produce A-level results. And transparently, 6 years ago, when I entered into this role, I dreamed about an A-level organization. An organization that was really on mission, that was cutting edge in terms of reaching people with the gospel, creating a culture that's compelling, that recruits people for the mission, that's innovative, that raises resources and multiplies leaders. But I had to honestly say, I'm not an A-level person. There's too many gaps in my character, too many gaps in who I am inside of myself to really consistently show up and give an A effort. I was a C-level person. So I had some work to do. And so here's some of the work that I did, and I would encourage you to do some of the similar work. You have to start with a personal audit, a personal inventory. Begin by asking yourselves questions like, what's going on around me when I'm operating in my A game? Think about the last few times when you felt like you were living in your sweet spot. What was happening there? So those are going to draw out some positive things about your leadership, and particularly what's your character base. Then there's some other questions like, what's going on in life when I get pulled down, when I get discouraged, when I get disappointed? What circumstances tend to trigger fear, anxiety, anger, guilt, or shame? And then fill in the blank. I tend to shut down when this occurs, or I tend to explode when these things occur. So do some self-evaluation, some self-assessment, and then take it to the next level. Take it to a few trusted friends and ask those same questions. And ask for some honest feedback. This takes courage, it takes vulnerability, it takes opening yourself up, but the rewards that you get from honest feedback will be really satisfying. And you'll probably get some feedback as you do this analysis and audit yourself and with other people that reflects the reality of what I found this morning in the apple tree in my home. There's two types of apples that I found on the apple tree this morning. One, you may need to take this a little bit by faith. This is a pretty good apple. And I've tasted apples from this tree, and they taste a little better than they look. But this is a pretty good product from the apple tree in my yard. Off the same tree came this apple. It's amazing that you've got the same tree that produces the same two different kinds of fruit. And I think that's similar to what happens in our own life. As I looked at my life 6 years ago and continue to evaluate my own leadership journey, I continue to see good fruit that comes out of good character, and I continue to see bad fruit that comes out of soft spots or gaps in my character structure. In essence, I'm asking you to look at the fruit in your life. And you can look at fruit in your life in three different areas. In the personal area, look at your behaviors, look at your emotions. What trends or tendencies do you see? Good tendencies and negative, harmful, destructive tendencies that you see in this personal area. A second area is people. It's your relationships. If you're married, it's a relationship with your spouse. If you have children, it's a relationship with your children. Relationships with family, extended family members or team members on your team. But take an honest look at what fruit you're seeing in the people side of things and in the area of relationships. And then thirdly would be performance. Your role on staff. Do you feel like you're productive? Are you energized? Are you fruitful? Are you seeing the mission move forward? Are you feeling energized by what God's called you to do and your part in the mission? And so, giving you categories on how to think about fruit in your life. There's people, there's performance, and there's personal areas that you can do your own audit and inventory in. And now, I want you to think about making a critical connection. The critical and important connection is connecting the fruit in your life with the soil. And the soil is your heart. You must go from the fruit and the external realities and how people experience you and even how you experience yourself in your own leadership journey. You must go from there down into the soil of your life. You know, for me to change the reality of this fruit showing up on my apple tree, I have to dig around in the soil, I have to fertilize, I have to do the right kind of pruning, I have to make sure this apple tree gets plenty of water. And if I neglect the soil, the tendency will be I'll get more of this kind of fruit that honestly no one would want to eat this apple. And so the same thing is true in our own personal lives. When we connect the fruit in our life with what's happening in the soil, we have a real shot at leading ourselves effectively. A biblical reference here is found when Jesus gave a parable about the soil and the fruit in Luke chapter 13, verses 6 through 9. I would encourage you to study that passage and make some application to your own life. I want to give an example of my own life. As I began to look at some fruit in my own life that was hard, that was difficult, and I had some bad fruit, some bad outcomes in my life when I entered into harder conversations and conflict. And my tendency was to pull back, to shut down, and isolate. Now, in a leadership role, that's not a good strategy. Anytime you isolate, shut down, and pull back, that's not a winning formula for being an A-level leader. And so I had some work to do in this area. And by the grace of God and through the help of others, I started digging around in my heart, in the soil. And I found some things in my character structure that yielded that kind of fruit in my life. And there were soft spots, there were gaps in my character, there were some patterns in my family of origin that were not good, healthy models for me. And through a series of being proactive, inviting other people into my life, getting the kind of resourcing that I need to fill in those gaps, I'm a much more confident person today to step in and be present, be connected with people in the midst of conflict, and I can actually do a much better job of engaging in hard conversations than I was able to do 6 years ago. Let me conclude with a few thoughts. We can no longer view self-leadership and self-care as optional. One of the big misses that I see in leaders today is they just assume that the self-care manages itself and it's on autopilot and it takes care of itself. That is not it's not a proper reality to have about leading yourself. We really have to give attention to the character structure in our heart so that ultimately our leadership flows out of a heart that's connected. It gets the resources of grace and truth and connections with people that we need. And that's the kind of leadership that really honors God and glorifies Him and becomes an attractive reality for others to follow. You know, a really good day in my month is when I commit to 2 days a month, 2 days out of the 20 work days, where I really invest in myself. I take a personal retreat day. I get alone. I get quiet before the Lord. I think about my life. I review some key measurements in my own life for the organization. I dream. I pray. I take prayer walks. On a good month, I spend a day like that. And then another day, I invest with others in a leadership, spiritual formation time, where I'm really asking others to speak into my life. I'm getting some good input that's biblically based, that is directed toward my character, and I'm living that out in community and relationship with others. So I would encourage you to make sure that you're not compromising on any time that you would invest in the incredible goal of investing in yourself and leading yourself well. And you remember the leadership framework, right? A leader relates to God, self, and others. Those are the three primary relationships that we have. And leading self must lead to an ongoing, abiding relationship with God and a deeper level connection with others. One of the things I find missing in a lot of leaders' lives is real, vulnerable, need-based connections with other people. It's one of the biggest misses and gaps that I observe in leaders in their own leadership journey. If your self-leadership does not lead you to deeper connections with a few trusted friends where you can really do life together, your self-leadership needs to be corrected to make sure that you're really involving other people in your life. Think about the numerous places in the New Testament where the one another commands are given to the body of Christ and those who follow Christ. For many years I've seen those commands as applicable for me to give something to someone else. Encouragement, respect, love, honor. Now I'm thinking about not only that piece, what I give to others, but what I need from others. And many times I have to ask others to be the recipient of them fulfilling that command to me. And that's been a huge step for me, to ask for my needs to be met, to specifically invite people to deeper places in my life. And the fruit that's come out of those relationships over time has been very significant in my life. Well, I want to applaud the leadership journey that you're on, and I want to implore you to keep going. And what you're doing at the local level, across the country, I pray for on a regular basis, and I commend you and I admire you for what you're doing. A couple months ago, I was listening to a friend of mine, Dave Lindsay. Dave leads a very large company called Defender. They produce home security systems. Dave has been a partner with Athletes in Action and a sponsor for the Super Bowl breakfast, and has been involved in other areas of AIA. He said, companies don't grow, people do. And when we as staff take responsibility for our own growth, we take charge of our own lives and take real responsibility for leading ourselves, the result is growth. And when that starts to be multiplied around Athletes in Action, when every staff is really in a legitimate and healthy growth process, the overall impact is Athletes in Action is a very attractive place to work. We're on mission with God, and He gets all the glory that is rightly His to get. Thanks for a few minutes with you, and I wish you well in your leadership journey, particularly leading yourself.